The day they divided my husband's inheritance, my daughter-in-law wore red. Not black, not white, red. She sat across the polished oak table, her fingers wrapped around a glass of sparkling water as if she were already toasting to victory. And when the lawyer cleared his throat and began reading the distribution of assets, she didn't even try to hide her smile. But I smiled too, because what none of them knew, not my son, not his ambitious wife, not even the lawyer, was that the real inheritance had never been written on that paper. And my son, my poor blinded son, still didn't know. The room felt colder than it should have. My late husband's portrait hung behind the lawyer's chair, his calm eyes staring down at us as if he could already see what was about to unfold. The house, the lake property, the company shares, the savings accounts, each asset was read out slowly clinically. My daughter-in-law, Vanessa, leaned closer every time the lawyer mentioned something valuable. Her perfume filled the room, something sharp and expensive. She had chosen it carefully today. My son, Daniel, avoided my eyes. That hurt more than anything else. 3 years ago, Daniel used to call me every evening. He would tell me about work, about his dreams, about the house he wanted to buy. Then Vanessa came into his life like a beautiful storm. Charming, intelligent, strategic, and slowly I became unnecessary. "Oh, Mrs. Carter," the lawyer said gently, "as per your late husband's will, the majority of the business shares will be transferred to Daniel." Vanessa squeezed his hand. Not lovingly, possessively. I watched her nails press into his skin. "And the primary residence," the lawyer continued, "will remain in Mrs. Carter's name." Vanessa's smile twitched, only slightly. But I noticed the lake property would be sold and the funds split. The investment accounts divided equally between me and Daniel. On paper, it looked fair. Vanessa leaned back in her chair, satisfied. She had calculated this moment for months. She had already convinced Daniel that I would eventually step aside and transfer everything to him anyway. She had whispered it into his ears at night. "You're the only son. It all becomes yours eventually." She thought I didn't hear the late night arguments. She thought I didn't see the way she monitored his calls. She thought I didn't notice how Daniel stopped visiting unless she approved. But grief sharpens a mother's instincts. After the lawyer finished, Vanessa stood up first. "Well," she said brightly, "I guess everything worked out fairly?" "Fairly. My husband built that business from nothing. I stood beside him through bankruptcy threats, sleepless nights, and unpaid bills." Vanessa had been in the picture for barely 2 years. Daniel finally looked at me. "Mom, you're okay with this, right?" There it was. Not concern, permission. I folded my hands on the table and gave him the softest smile I could manage. "Of course, Daniel," I said gently. "Why wouldn't I be?" Vanessa's shoulders relaxed, and that's when I said it. "Son, you still don't know!" The air shifted. Daniel frowned. "Know what?" Vanessa's eyes narrowed almost invisibly. She had the instincts of a predator. She sensed danger before it arrived. I tilted my head slightly, as if I had almost forgotten something minor. "Oh," I said lightly. "Nothing important. Your father and I just made a few adjustments before he passed." The lawyer stiffened. Vanessa turned sharply toward him. "Adjustments?" Daniel looked confused. "Mom, what adjustments?" I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my black dress. I had chosen black for a reason. "To protect you," I said softly. Vanessa laughed, a short, controlled sound. "Protect him from what?" I met her eyes for the first time that afternoon. "From people who love money more than family." Silence. Daniel's face flushed. "Mom, that's not fair." "I didn't say I was talking about anyone specific," I replied calmly. "But I was." The lawyer cleared his throat again. "There is, in fact, an additional legal document that was requested to remain confidential unless certain conditions were met." Vanessa's glass slipped slightly in her hand. "What conditions?" she demanded. The lawyer hesitated. He looked at me. I gave him a small nod. "If Daniel's marital status changes within 5 years of Mr. Carter's passing." The lawyer began carefully. "Control of the company's shares reverts fully to Mrs. Carter." The color drained from Vanessa's face. Daniel blinked. "What? Why would that?" And the lawyer continued, "Any attempt to sell, transfer, or leverage the shares without Mrs. Carter's written approval will immediately freeze all associated assets." Vanessa stood up abruptly. "That's ridiculous. That's manipulative." I kept my expression calm, almost sympathetic. "It's protective." I corrected. Daniel looked between us, confusion turning into frustration. "Mom, you think my marriage is some kind of risk?" I stepped closer to him. I said softly, "that love doesn't rush inheritance discussions 2 weeks after a funeral." His jaw tightened. Vanessa grabbed his arm. "Daniel, this is emotional blackmail." But I wasn't finished. "There's also a clause regarding the lake property sale," I added gently. Vanessa froze. "The sale cannot proceed without unanimous consent." Her lips parted slightly. Daniel turned to the lawyer. "Why didn't you tell us this before?" "Because," the lawyer replied carefully, "Mrs. Carter instructed that it only be revealed if there appeared to be external pressure." External pressure. Vanessa's breathing changed, slightly faster, slightly sharper. For the first time that afternoon, she wasn't smiling. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "Mom, do you not trust my wife?" I looked at him, really looked at him. "I trust actions," I said quietly. "Not words." Vanessa stepped forward. "This is insane. You're punishing us because we're planning our future." "Planning," I echoed gently. "Or calculating." Her eyes flashed. Daniel raised his voice for the first time. No, this is supposed to be about Dad. It is, I said. And that was the truth, because 2 months before my husband passed, he had sat beside me in the hospital room, tubes in his arms, oxygen hissing softly. He had grabbed my hand and whispered, "If she's marrying him for the money, you'll see it when I'm gone." At the time, I told him he was paranoid. Now, I wasn't so sure. Vanessa suddenly turned sweet again. It was almost impressive how quickly she could switch masks. "Mom," she said softly, stepping toward me, "we're family. Why would you create legal traps for family? Because I've watched you treat my son like an investment portfolio." But I didn't say that out loud. Instead, I smiled again, the same calm smile I had worn since the reading began. "You're right," I said gently. "We are family, and families reveal themselves when money enters the room." Daniel exhaled heavily. "So what happens now?" Now the real game begins." I picked up my handbag. "Now," I said quietly. "We give it time?" Vanessa's eyes searched my face, trying to decode something she couldn't quite understand. Because what she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that the company shares Daniel inherited weren't the most valuable asset my husband left behind. Not even close. And the real decision hadn't been made by the lawyer. It had been made by me, long before the funeral, long before Vanessa ever wore red to celebrate. But they would only discover that piece when they pushed too far. And judging by the way Vanessa's fingers tightened around Daniel's arm as we left the room, that moment was coming very soon. Vanessa didn't speak during the drive home. That was the first sign. Normally, she filled silence the way other people filled empty glasses, quickly and with purpose. She analyzed, suggested, redirected. But that afternoon, she stared out the window, her jaw tight, her mind moving. Daniel tried twice to start a conversation. "It's just a protection clause," he said carefully. "Mom gets emotional." No response. "She's grieving. Dad only passed 3 weeks ago." Still nothing. When they pulled into their driveway, Vanessa stepped out before the engine fully stopped. She walked straight into the house without waiting for him, and Daniel didn't notice the way her expression changed the moment she thought no one was watching. But I did, because I was watching. Not from their driveway, from much closer. That evening, Daniel called me. "Mom, can we talk?" His voice sounded strained. "Of course, sweetheart." There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear Vanessa's voice faintly in the background. Sharp, controlled, angry. "She thinks you don't trust her," he said. I smiled softly into the receiver. "Do you?" Another pause. "That's not fair." "Answer the question." He sighed. "I don't know, and that was enough for me. Seeds of doubt don't need storms, they just need time." Over the next few days, Vanessa began visiting more frequently. Alone, she would bring pastries, compliment my house, ask about my health. Her tone turned syrupy sweet. "I've been thinking," she said one afternoon, setting down a box of lemon tarts. "Maybe we all got off on the wrong foot." "Maybe," I replied, pouring tea. She walked around my living room slowly, eyes scanning everything, the antique cabinets, the framed photos, the old piano. "You must feel lonely here," she said gently. "Such a big house?" I didn't miss the suggestion. "I've lived here for 40 years, I answered. "Loneliness isn't measured in square footage." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Daniel mentioned the company restructuring your husband was planning." Ah, there it was. Casual. Careful. Calculated. "Yes," I said calmly. He had many ideas. Vanessa leaned forward slightly. Ideas that could benefit Daniel tremendously. I stirred my tea slowly. "Daniel benefits from stability," I corrected. "Not greed." Her mask slipped just for a second. "I'm not greedy." I looked at her gently. "Of course not." Silence filled the room like smoke. Then she changed tactics. "You know," she said softly, "Daniel has always wanted to expand the company internationally. He has vision. So did his father," I replied. "And you're standing in the way of that vision?" The words came out before she could polish them. There it was again, not family. Strategy. I set my cup down carefully. "Vanessa," I said quietly, "tell me something honestly. If there were no inheritance, would you still have married my son?" Her eyes hardened instantly. "That's insulting." "It's a question." She stood up. "I love your son." I didn't argue. I just watched. Because people reveal truth in what they defend most aggressively. 3 days later, Daniel showed up unexpectedly. Alone. He looked tired. "We've been fighting," he admitted the moment he sat down. I didn't pretend to be surprised. "She says you're manipulating me." "Am I?" He rubbed his face. "She thinks you're trying to create tension between us." I leaned back slowly. "Daniel, when your father was building his company, do you know how many people pretended to support him?" He frowned. "What does that have to do with?" "They praised him when profits rose. They vanished when losses came." Daniel was silent. "Loyalty is tested during uncertainty," I continued, "not during distribution." He stared at the floor. "Do you think she married me for money?" He asked quietly. The pain in his voice almost broke me. "I think," I said carefully, "that love and ambition sometimes wear the same face." He left that night more confused than when he arrived, and confusion is uncomfortable. Uncomfortable people ask questions. That same week, something interesting happened. Vanessa contacted the lawyer directly. She requested detailed financial projections of the company's future growth under Daniel's control. She asked about potential liquidation timelines. She inquired about loan leverage options. The lawyer, loyal to my husband even after death, informed me of everything. She's aggressive, he said on the phone. I expected that. I replied, what would you like to do? Nothing. Silence unsettles opportunists more than resistance. 2 weeks passed. Daniel began visiting more often. Without Vanessa, he started asking about his father's early struggles, about decisions made during financial crisis, about sacrifices. One evening, he found an old ledger in my study, handwritten notes from when the company was barely surviving. At the back of the ledger was a sealed envelope, his name written on it. He looked at me surprised. What's this? Your father left it, I said softly. But I didn't think you were ready. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside was a simple letter, no legal language, no numbers, just words. Daniel read silently for several minutes. His breathing changed. What does it say? I asked gently. He swallowed. He says wealth exposes character. And if I ever feel pressure to prioritize money over integrity, I should step back and observe who benefits most from urgency. His voice cracked slightly. He wrote that before he got sick. I said quietly. Daniel sat there for a long time, processing. That night, when he returned home, he didn't argue. He noticed how quickly Vanessa brought up expansion again, how she suggested selling the lake property immediately, how she mentioned luxury investments before discussing company stability. And for the first time, he didn't defend her automatically. The following weekend, they hosted a dinner with 2 of Vanessa's friends. I was invited. Vanessa didn't expect me to come, but I did. Halfway through dinner, one of her friends laughed and said, Vanessa always said she'd never marry a man without serious financial potential. The table went quiet. Vanessa's fork froze mid-air. Oh, please, she said quickly. We were joking. Her friend blinked, confused. You said it at Claire's engagement party. Daniel's eyes slowly shifted toward his wife. I remained silent. Vanessa recovered quickly, smiling too brightly. We were young and ambitious. Everyone says things like that. But Daniel wasn't smiling, because memory had begun connecting dots. And once doubt settles in, it doesn't leave quietly. Later that night, Daniel called me again. She lied. I didn't say that. I replied softly. But you knew. I suspected. There's a difference. I need time, he said. Yes, I agreed. You do? Meanwhile, Vanessa realized something was changing. Daniel had stopped discussing finances enthusiastically. He had stopped pushing for quick sales. He had started asking for transparency. And worst of all, he had started thinking independently. That frightened her more than any clause in a will. 3 nights later, an argument erupted loud enough for neighbors to hear. Vanessa accused him of being brainwashed. Daniel accused her of obsession. Words were thrown like knives. And in the middle of that chaos, Vanessa made a mistake, a small one, but irreversible. She said, I didn't marry you to live like this, waiting for your mother's approval for every financial move. Silence followed. Heavy, permanent. Daniel asked one quiet question. So why did you marry me? She didn't answer, because sometimes the truth arrives not as confession, but as absence. The next morning, Daniel came to see me. He looked older, not physically, emotionally. She wants to separate for a while, he said. I folded my hands calmly. And what do you want? He hesitated. For the first time, he admitted, I don't know if I ever truly saw her. I nodded gently. Grief removes illusions, I said. He looked at me carefully. Did you plan all of this? I met his gaze. I planned protection, I answered. For me, for our family's legacy. He exhaled slowly. Back at their house, Vanessa was making calls. Urgent ones. To her lawyer. To financial advisors. To friends. But urgency now worked against her. Because every move she made confirmed exactly what my husband had feared. And Daniel was finally watching closely. By the end of that week, the house Daniel once described as his dream home felt like a negotiation room. Every conversation circled back to money. Vanessa tried subtle first. Maybe we should meet with a financial planner together. Then firmer. We can't just let your mother control everything. Then sharp. She's manipulating you and you're letting her. Daniel didn't argue anymore. He listened, he watched, he remembered. He started noticing small things he had ignored before, how Vanessa's mood improved when they discussed expansion, how it darkened when he talked about slowing down, how she scrolled through luxury property listings late at night, how she calculated aloud. If we liquidate the lake property and leverage the shares, we could triple capital in 2 years. But the urgency wasn't about growth anymore. It was about access. And she was running out of patience. One evening, Daniel did something simple. He said no. Vanessa had arranged a meeting with an investor without telling him. When she presented the proposal at dinner, expecting excitement, he calmly replied, I'm not ready. Her smile froze. What do you mean you're not ready? He said steadily, I'm not signing anything. Not now. Her fork hit the plate harder than necessary. This is your father's company. Don't you want to make it bigger? I want to understand it first. She stared at him as if he had betrayed her. Since when? Since I realized I've been rushing decisions I don't fully believe in. Silence. Then she said something she shouldn't have. If you don't act fast, opportunities disappear. And he answered quietly, so do people who only stay for opportunities. That night, she slept in the guest room. The next morning, Daniel received an email. It wasn't from Vanessa, it was from the investor she had contacted. Attached was a forwarded message accidentally included from Vanessa herself. In it, she had written, "Once Daniel secures full operational control, we can move quickly. His mother won't have influence forever." Daniel, read that sentence 3 times. His mother won't have influence forever. Not partnership. Not shared vision. Removal. He didn't call me immediately. He drove for hours, trying to understand how love could feel real and calculated at the same time. By the time he arrived at my house, dusk had settled over the porch. He didn't knock. He had his own key. He walked in quietly and found me in the kitchen. "I found something," he said. His voice was calm, too calm. He handed me his phone. I read the message slowly. Then I handed it back without expression. "And now?" I asked. He swallowed. "No, I know. I didn't say I told you so. I didn't say your father warned you. I only said clarity is painful, but it's powerful." He sat down heavily. "I loved her. I know. And part of me still does. That part will fade," I said softly. "The part that loved who you thought she was." He stared at the table. "She wants to leave," he said, "but not before discussing financial terms." "Of course she does." "How generous," I replied gently. He looked up at me then. "Mom, what else did Dad plan?" I held his gaze for a long moment, more than she ever imagined. Because the truth was, the inheritance structure was only the surface layer. Months before his death, my husband had quietly restructured ownership. The majority voting power of the company didn't sit with the shares Daniel received. It sat with a trust Daniel didn't even know existed, and I was its temporary executor, the final beneficiary. Daniel's future child, not his spouse, not me. Bloodline. Stability. Time. "Your father believed in long games," I had told him once. Now I understood why. Daniel leaned back in his chair. "She asked for a postnuptial agreement tonight," he said. I raised an eyebrow. She said it's just practical. To protect both of us. "And what does it protect her from?" I asked. He let out a humorless laugh. "Apparently from your conditions." There it was again. Everything led back to me. Not her urgency, not her messages, not her calculations. Me. "She says you've poisoned my mind." "Have I?" He looked at me steadily. "No," he said. "You didn't have to." The next confrontation came faster than either of us expected. Vanessa arrived at my house unannounced 2 days later. Her composure was gone. She didn't bring pastries. She didn't bring perfume. She brought anger. "You did this," she said the moment I opened the door. "Good afternoon, Vanessa." "Stop pretending. You planted doubt in him?" I stepped aside calmly and gestured for her to enter. She refused. I loved him. I studied her face carefully. Maybe she believed that. Maybe ambition and affection had grown tangled inside her. But love without integrity collapses under pressure. "You loved what he represented?" I said quietly. "That's not true?" "Then why the rush?" Her breathing quickened. "Because hesitation loses advantage." Exactly. She realized what she had said a second too late. We stood there in silence. Finally, she asked the question she had been avoiding. "What else is in that will?" I smiled slightly. "Enough." Her eyes flashed. "You think you've won. This isn't a competition. It became one the day you decided I wasn't good enough for your son." I tilted my head. "No," I said calmly. "It became one the day you saw him as leverage." Her face hardened completely. "You underestimate me." "Do I?" She leaned closer. "Daniel's conflicted. He still loves me. You can't control that. I don't need to." She stared at me, trying to read whether I was bluffing. I wasn't. Because I knew something she didn't. Daniel had already met with his own lawyer. Not to renegotiate inheritance, but to understand divorce. He hadn't told her yet. He wanted to see one more thing, one final confirmation, and Vanessa, in her impatience, was about to give it. That evening, Daniel returned home and told her calmly, "Let's pause everything. No investors, no agreements, no financial planning. Just us. For 6 months. 6 months without advancement. 6 months without leverage. 6 months without access." Vanessa didn't hesitate. "That's unreasonable." "It's necessary." "For what?" "To see if we're strong without money." Her silence lasted 3 seconds. Then she said it. "I can't waste 6 months." There it was. Not "I'm hurt, I can't waste." Daniel nodded slowly. "Then maybe we're not building the same future." She tried to recover. "You're choosing your mother over me." "No," he said quietly. "I'm choosing clarity over illusion." And in that moment, she understood something terrifying. The clauses, the trust, the protections, they weren't the real trap. Patience was. Because the longer she stayed without financial momentum, the less control she had, and control was everything to her. 3 days later, she filed for separation. Fast, efficient, strategic. But this time, Daniel didn't beg. He didn't defend. He didn't argue. He signed the initial paperwork with steady hands. And when she demanded financial negotiation based on anticipated growth, his lawyer calmly responded with a copy of the inheritance clauses. No liquidation, no leverage, no accelerated access. She had married potential. She was leaving limitation. What she didn't know yet was that the final layer layer of my husband's plan hadn't even activated. And when it did, it wouldn't just protect Daniel, it would expose her completely. But that revelation required one more move, and this time, it wouldn't come from me. It would come from her own ambition. The separation process moved quickly on paper, but slowly in emotion. Vanessa didn't move out immediately. She stayed in the house, claiming she needed time to transition. In reality, she was still calculating angles. Daniel let her stay, not out of weakness. Out of observation, he had stopped reacting. That unsettled her more than any argument ever had. At night, she made phone calls on the balcony, her voice low but urgent. She believed he couldn't hear her through the glass doors. She was wrong. One evening, Daniel stepped outside quietly while she was mid-sentence. "No, the trust structure complicates things," she whispered. If I had known the shares weren't liquid, I would have." She froze when she saw him. Would have what? The sentence hung unfinished in the air. Daniel didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He simply said, "Finish that thought." She straightened. "You're eavesdropping. You were discussing my inheritance." "It affects me?" "Does it?" He asked calmly. Her composure cracked just slightly. "You think you're smarter now?" She snapped. "You think your mother didn't manipulate this entire situation?" Daniel stepped closer. "No," he said evenly. "I think I ignored red flags because I was in love." Silence. Sharp. Uncomfortable. For the first time, Vanessa didn't have an immediate counter. But ambition doesn't retreat easily. It pivots. The following week, she made a bold move. She contacted a journalist. Not a major one, just enough to create pressure. An article appeared online titled, "Family Feud Over Late Businessman's Fortune Raises Questions." The piece painted a subtle narrative, a controlling mother restricting a young couple's financial freedom. It implied outdated thinking, generational power struggles, emotional interference. My name wasn't directly attacked, but the tone was clear. Vanessa sent the link to Daniel with a simple message. "This is embarrassing. Your mother is ruining your reputation." Daniel read the article twice. Then he did something she didn't expect. He forwarded it to me with one line. "Thought you should see this." I read it calmly. Then I called our lawyer. "Release the letter," I said. There was a pause. "Are you sure?" He asked. "Yes." Because my husband had anticipated something like this. He had written more than a private note to Daniel. He had recorded a video. Sealed, legally time-stamped, meant to be released only if public disputes over inheritance occurred. The next day, the same journalist received a new file. Not from me, from the lawyer's office. The article was updated. At the bottom, embedded beneath the speculative narrative, was a video. In it, my husband sat in his office months before his death. Weaker, yes, but sharp, focused. He looked directly into the camera. "If you're watching this," he began, "it means my family is facing public scrutiny over my estate." He spoke calmly. "I want it clear that every clause, every trust, every safeguard was my decision, not my wife's." She argued against some of them. I insisted. Daniel watched the video in the living room while Vanessa stood behind him. Frozen. "I built my company by studying character." My husband continued on screen, and I structured my legacy the same way. Wealth should reward patience, loyalty, and integrity, not urgency. Vanessa's breathing changed. Daniel didn't move. "If anyone feels restricted by my decisions," the video continued, "they are free to step away from my son's life. But they will not accelerate access to what took me 40 years to build." The video ended simply. No drama, no attack, just clarity. Within hours, the narrative shifted. The updated article reframed everything. Suddenly, it wasn't a controlling mother. It was a calculated businessman protecting generational stability. Vanessa didn't say a word that night, but something inside her had snapped. The next morning, she packed, not slowly, not thoughtfully, aggressively. Drawers slammed, closet doors banged. Daniel stood in the hallway watching. "Is this what you wanted?" she demanded. "I wanted honesty," he replied. "You chose her?" "I chose myself." She laughed bitterly. "You'll regret this." "Ah, maybe," he said calmly, "but not for the reasons you think." She paused at the door, and for a second, just a second, vulnerability flickered across her face. "You really think I never loved you?" Daniel's voice softened. "I think you loved the version of me that came with guarantees." That hurt her more than anger ever could, because part of her knew it wasn't entirely false. She left without another word. The house felt different afterward, quieter, lighter. Daniel moved back to my place temporarily, not because he needed protection, but because he needed perspective. Weeks passed. Legal negotiations unfolded predictably. Vanessa's lawyer attempted to argue project financial growth as marital expectation. Our lawyer responded with the trust documentation. Irrevocable, long-term, untouchable. The majority voting rights remained shielded. The shares Danielle held were income-generating but not explosive. Steady, controlled. She had gambled on acceleration. She was left with stability. One afternoon, Danielle sat across from me at the kitchen table. I ignored who she showed me she was. He said quietly, "You saw what you wanted to see." He nodded. I kept defending her because admitting the truth meant admitting I was wrong. That's human. He exhaled slowly. "I feel embarrassed." "You should feel wiser." He looked at me then, really looked. "Did you ever hate her?" I thought carefully. "No," I said honestly. I feared what urgency does to people. He absorbed that. Months later, the divorce finalized. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting. No public spectacle. Vanessa received a fair settlement based on documented marital contributions. Nothing more, nothing accelerated, nothing speculative. She tried once more to negotiate based on anticipated expansion plans, but Daniel refused. "I'm not expanding," he said calmly during mediation. "Not until I understand the foundation." That was the moment she fully understood. The man she had married no longer existed. The naive optimism, the blind trust, the rush, gone. In its place stood someone quieter, stronger, patient, and patience cannot be manipulated. After everything settled, Daniel returned to the company slowly. He didn't announce major changes. He didn't chase headlines. He met employees, reviewed history, studied failures. 6 months later, profits stabilized in ways they never had before. Measured growth, strategic partnerships, no reckless leaps. One evening, he sat beside me on the porch. "The funny thing," he said softly, "is that if she had just slowed down, none of this would have happened." I smiled faintly. "Yes," I replied, "but then she wouldn't have been herself." He looked out at the sunset. "Do you think she regrets it? Ambitious people regret outcomes?" I said gently. "Not motives." Silence settled comfortably between us. After a moment, he added, "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" I shook my head. "I hoped you would see clearly. And if I hadn't," I met his eyes. Then the trust would have waited. Because that was the final layer. Time. The inheritance was never about money. It was about exposure. Pressure reveals priorities. Delay reveals intention. Protection reveals character. Vanessa believed she was playing a short game. We were playing a generational one. Daniel leaned back in his chair. "I used to think you were controlling," he admitted. I laughed softly. Every mother protecting her child looks controlling to someone who wants access. He smiled for the first time in months. And in that smile, I saw something steady, something unhurried, something his father would have recognized immediately. As for Vanessa, she moved quickly into new circles, new opportunities, new calculations, because some people don't learn from losing leverage. They just search for better positioning. But this time, she would never again assume patience meant weakness. And Daniel, he finally understood what I had meant that day in the lawyer's office, when I smiled and said softly, "Son, you still don't know." A year passed, grief softened, silence healed, routine returned. Daniel no longer moved like a man recovering from betrayal. He moved like someone rebuilt by it. The company stabilized under his steady leadership. Employees who once feared aggressive expansion began expressing relief. Long-term contracts replaced risky ventures. Profits grew slowly, but solidly. And most importantly, Daniel stopped chasing validation. One evening, almost exactly 1 year after the inheritance meeting, he came home with unusual news. "I ran into Vanessa today," he said quietly. I didn't react immediately. I simply poured tea. "Where?" "Ate a charity gala downtown." I nodded. That sounded like her. High visibility, strategic rooms. She looked different. He continued. "Better," I asked Gent. He replied. "But tired." He sat across from me, staring into his cup. "She approached me first." "Of course she did." "What did she say?" "She said she underestimated you." A faint smile touched my lips. "And you?" I told her she underestimated patience. Silence followed, but not heavy this time, just reflective. "She's engaged," he added. I raised an eyebrow. "That was fast." He nodded slowly. "To an investor, tech sector, very aggressive growth style." I didn't comment. Daniel continued. "She said she hopes I've finally stepped out from under your shadow." I let out a soft laugh. "And have you?" He looked at me, not defensive, not conflicted, just certain. I stepped into my father's legacy, not your shadow. That answer was everything. Weeks later, something unexpected happened. Daniel received a formal invitation, Vanessa's wedding. Hand delivered, no personal note. Just a card. He brought it to me that evening. "Who are you going?" I asked. He thought for a moment. "No." Why? Because I don't need closure from someone who already showed me the truth. That was growth, not anger, not resentment, clarity. But life has a way of closing circles whether we attend the ceremony or not. 3 months after her wedding, news reached us quietly through business circles. Her new husband's company was under investigation. Aggressive leverage, questionable liquidity practices, overextended assets. Sound familiar? Daniel didn't celebrate, he didn't gloat, he just listened. A week later, Vanessa called him. The first time since the divorce finalized, he answered, not out of longing, out of calm. "I need advice," she said. Not hello, not how are you. Advice. He almost smiled at the familiarity of it. "About what?" he asked evenly. "My husband is considering selling major equity to cover losses. I think it's a mistake." He remained quiet. "You understand long-term strategy," she continued. "You always did. Always did." "Interesting. What do you want from me?" he asked. Perspective. The same thing she once dismissed as hesitation. Daniel glanced at me across the room. I wasn't listening closely intentionally. He didn't need me to. He replied calmly, "Slow decisions protect foundations." Silence on her end. "That's what your mother says too," she muttered. "No," he corrected gently. "That's what my father built." Another pause. Then she asked something softer. "Do you hate me?" Daniel leaned back in his chair. "No," he said honestly. "I understand you. And sometimes being understood is heavier than being hated." She exhaled. "I thought moving fast meant winning." "It only means moving fast," he replied. After the call ended, he sat quietly for a long time. She's repeating the pattern, he finally said. I answered, because she never believed the pattern was the problem. Months passed, investigations deepened. Her new husband's company collapsed under financial pressure. Assets frozen, reputation damaged, and suddenly the kind of stability she once dismissed became priceless. One afternoon, Daniel received an unexpected visitor at the office. Vanessa, no makeup, no polished armor, just exhaustion. She stood in his office doorway, hesitant for the first time since I'd known her. I won't take long, she said. He gestured for her to sit. She didn't. I made the same mistake twice, she admitted quietly. He waited. I thought acceleration equals security. He nodded slowly. Doesn't. She looked around his office, steady growth charts, loyal employees moving confidently through hallways, calm. You built this differently, she said. I protected it differently, he corrected. She swallowed. I misjudged your mother. He didn't defend me. He didn't need to. I misjudged you too, she added. He studied her carefully. For what it's worth, she continued, you loved me honestly? I did, he said, and I cared about you. But I cared about outcome more? There it was. The confession she couldn't give a year ago. He nodded. Thank you for saying that. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back quickly. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't owe resentment, he replied calmly. Silence stretched between them, not hostile, just honest. As she turned to leave, she paused. Your father was right, she said softly. Yes, Daniel answered. He usually was. She left without asking for anything. No money, no leverage, no shortcut, just awareness. That was her ending. Not dramatic collapse. Not public humiliation, just the slow realization that impatience had cost her stability. Twice that evening, Daniel told me everything. She finally admitted it. He said quietly. I nodded. Growth often comes after loss, I replied. Do you think she'll change? Only if she decides security matters more than speed. He leaned back in his chair on the porch, the same place where a year ago he sat confused and heartbroken. I used to think winning meant expanding faster than everyone else, he said. And now I think winning means sleeping peacefully. I smiled. That's your father's voice. He looked out at the horizon. You know, he said thoughtfully, if she had stayed patient, she would have eventually shared everything. Yes, I agreed. Instead, she rushed and lost it all. Not all, I corrected gently. She gained a lesson. He laughed softly. An expensive one. The sun dipped lower. Golden light stretched across the yard. And for the first time since that day in the lawyer's office, I allowed myself to fully exhale, because this was never about punishing Vanessa, it was never about controlling Daniel. It was about revealing truth before irreversible damage occurred. The inheritance wasn't money. It was wisdom, protection, time. Daniel turned to me suddenly. When you smiled that day at the reading, were you scared? I thought about it. Yes, I admitted. Off what? That you might choose illusion over clarity. He nodded slowly. I almost did, but you didn't. He reached over and squeezed my hand, not as a boy seeking guidance, but as a man acknowledging partnership. You were right, he said quietly. I shook my head. No, your father was prepared. I just followed through. He smiled, and I finally understood. The wind moved gently through the trees, a calm that couldn't be purchased, couldn't be rushed, couldn't be leveraged, and in that quiet moment, Daniel said something that closed the entire circle. You know what the real inheritance was. I raised an eyebrow. Patience, he said. And the ability to see people clearly. I nodded.
Yes, that was it.
Because in the end, wealth didn't destroy our family. Urgency almost did, and when I smiled across that table a year ago, while my daughter-in-law celebrated too early, it wasn't revenge I was holding, it was certainty. Certainty that time would expose what emotion tried to hide. Certainty that my son would grow into the man his father believed he could be. And certainty that those who chase inheritance without understanding legacy eventually inherit their own consequences. That was the final truth. And now, he finally knew.